What can you see? Hi, welcome to our live webinar on a brief introduction to developing the music curriculum in the primary school. Now, there's a little bit of a delay, between me speaking and it coming up on YouTube. So I'm going to give it a little minute. Welcome to our live I'm just going to give you a little bit of a minute. Sorry, we've got some feedback. Give it. Okay, so there's a little bit of a delay, as I said, between me speaking and it coming up on YouTube. So while we're waiting for everyone to join us, I would just like to introduce myself and tell you a little bit what's happening today. So my name's Kirsten. I trained as a music teacher at the Royal Scottish Academy of Music and Drama. I have been head of music and drama and at various schools over the last 10 years. And now I lead music and drama at an independent boys prep school. So the purpose of today really is for me to share some of my experiences and my knowledge as a music specialist with those of you who are leading music in the primary school, but you are not subject specialists. So we'll just give everyone a little minute to join us. If I flick back over to the chat, we can see who's here. So if you are here in the chat, then please do say hello. I will, there's 3 sections to today's event, and at the end of each section we will come back to the chat and we'll have a little look at any comments or questions or suggestions that you've put in the chat. So although I won't see it while I'm presenting, please do put comments and questions into the chat, and then I will come back to the end of every section and see if we can answer some of your questions. Morning, Jenny. So I can't actually see how many are here. I'm going to ask my able assistant. Can you see how many people are here so far?
We have 12.
12, excellent, out of 25.
14.
14. So we'll just wait a little minute, one more minute before we dive in, because we've got a lot to get through. Now, obviously, we are recording this as well. You will get a PDF booklet of today's presentation that you can make your own notes on and you can refer back to later on. This is also being recorded and it will be available on YouTube for you to watch whenever you want to refer back to it. Now, we will be putting the chat up on the screen and we'll scroll through it later. So do be aware of that when typing in the chat. The chat will be part of the recording, but I can always blur bits out if we need to, if there's any side chatting going on. Right, I think we will jump into our presentation now. So as I said, thank you for joining me. Now this today really is a brief introduction and a bit of a whistle-stop tour through how we can develop the music curriculum in the primary school. So, essentially today is going to be about curriculum sequencing and content. And for me, I see that as having 3 main sections, each of those sections sort of comprising of 2 parts. Now, this is, of course, my opinion, my experience, based on my experiences, the schools I've worked in and my own research. So please just, whenever I say anything, just caveat it with, in Kirsten's opinion, and then I won't have to keep saying it throughout. So we're going to start with assessment rubrics and coverage today. So in terms of the first thing you need to do really when you're thinking about the music curriculum in the primary school is what is your long-term planning, what is your curriculum coverage? So I approach it by looking at the broad outline of what we're going to be teaching over the entire key stage, whether that be early years, key stage 1, key stage 2, or maybe you're just responsible for one of those key stages. What are you wanting to cover over the entire key stage? Then split it into those year groups, and then split those year groups again into units. I used the wonderful Incorporated Society of Musicians draft national curriculum as a starting point, but then I adapted it to suit my setting because we got to the end of Key Stage 3, and I ended up with 11 musical strands, which we cover every year. Some strands we cover in more detail than others, but my 11 strands are exploring, pulse, singing, following direction, ensemble skills, musicality, listening and analysing, composing, communication, notation, and appraising. So each of those strands has a descriptive statement, which is slightly different depending on which year group it is. We would call that a generic rubric. And then I provide the students with more detailed success statements for each task, which technically is called a task-specific rubric. Once we've done that, I also sequence my units over first, second, and further teaching of each concept so that we can see when we're actually introducing new concepts and when we're building on prior learning. Because as those of you who've looked into cognitive load, you'll know that the more opportunities that we give students to automate some of the processes involved, the more we reduce that cognitive load, and therefore the more brain space basically they have to tackle the new information. So essentially it's little and often. Now, this will be quite hard for you to see, but this is essentially my generic rubric, which covers stage 1 to stage 6, so essentially year 1 to year 6 across the 11 strands. So there are 66 statements there. So this isn't technically a rubric until you apply a scoring system. And so EYFS up to lower key stage 2, I use sort of working towards, working at, working beyond. So I just score at 1, 2, or 3. And then at upper key stage 2 and key stage 3, I actually score them out of 4, just to have a little bit more nuance in our scoring. So is it emerging, developing, securing, or mastering? Now, there's quite a lot of information in here, and the best thing that I would suggest you do is go away and have a little look at my blog post using assessment rubrics in the classroom. And I also did a podcast interview with the fantastic Non-Contact Time podcast where I explained it a little bit more. But all the research, the reading is in that blog post, so you can go away and have a little look. There's lots of different schemes of work out there that you can buy into. One of them being charanga. Most schools, if you check with your local authority, if you're part of the local authority, or if you buy into the Music Hub, you may well already have a charanga subscription through them. You just have to ask for it. So this is an example of a task-specific assessment criteria produced by Charanga. They call it their music passport. And it just sort of talks to the sort of things that the student can tick off for themselves, but what they can do. So it doesn't actually become a rubric until you apply the assessment statements. But as you can see, Charanga give you an assessment log and they say use a shorthand of your choice to record the outcomes, i.e. working towards, working at, or working beyond. So essentially 1, 2, or 3. So they use 7 broad strands. I use 11. But really it is up to you whether or not you want to, if you're just looking for something that you can pick up, teach and implement, or if you're looking for something a little bit more bespoke for your students. So here's just a basic example that I made up of my long-term planning. There's no point in me giving you exactly what I use because every school is different. But here's an idea of across 3 units how you might sequence and show your first, second, further teaching. So you can see here that our first teaching of treble clef, lines and spaces becomes the second teaching in the next unit, further teaching in subsequent units. again with our listening and appraising. We cover it again in the next unit and again in the next unit. So you're always revisiting that same information and then introducing more new information, because if we look at unit 3, for the students to really use sharps and flats and for us to delve into that level of music theory, they really do need to know quite automatically the treble clef, the lines, spaces, perhaps bass clef too. So that needs, they need to be able to recall that information on demand. It needs to not be causing them cognitive stress trying to think about what is that note. You know, they just have to know what that is in order to apply the sharps and flats to it. Same with structure, for instance. Rondo structure is more complex. So being able to identify binary and ternary or AB, ABA structure, and then being able to explain what the difference is then for rondo. Again, the more you can do it, the more you can automate the process, the more you're reducing that cognitive load. And again, performing as an ensemble, you cannot perform as an ensemble if you can't perform as a soloist. You need to be able to perform in the first place. And then if you look at coverage, these are based on my 11 strands. So strand 2, strand 6, strand 10, and you can just chart them through as you go. I've also got a spreadsheet because I like a spreadsheet, but you can just have a little, just mark it on your long-term plans as well. So for me, on my long-term planning, I'm talking about topics really, or concepts, not quite the nitty-gritty of how we teach it, but the what we are teaching. Right. So I'm going to nip back into the chat just now and just see if there's anything that we want to talk about. So there is a little bit of a delay. So if you want to put anything in the chat just now, we can do that and see if anything comes up. I'll have a little drink just now as well. So hello to anyone that joined us a little bit late. I'll just recap. We are jumping into the live chat just now to see if anyone's got any questions or comments, anything they want to discuss about long-term planning before we move on. So Mrs. McCartney wants to know, am I adapting my plans in view of no singing? Yes and no. I'm really lucky in the sense that my classes from year 6, 7 and 8 are only 15, and so we can still sing because the guidance has said that, you know, we shouldn't sing in groups of more than 15, but my classes sort of fall below that number. In terms of, and thank you to Carrie, what about recorders? In terms of the younger years, I have replaced them with Glockenspiels. And so yes, I am adapting the plans a little bit, and we will come on to the Glockenspiels in our next section, and I'll be able to show you. So yes, unfortunately, wind instruments, again, we can still use them if you have groups of less than 15, and it's something that you need to discuss with your school. Is there a way that you can adapt those sessions so that rather than having a group of 30 for an hour, could you have a group of 15 for 30 minutes and then the other group of 15 for 30 minutes? So you may need to join forces with perhaps the other PPA coverage. So if it's an art or DT, you know, they might want to do something similar. So could you basically both take year 4 at the same time and then swap over halfway through so that you've got groups of 15. So, right, we'll jump back into the presentation just now. So, practical music making and levels of difficulty. One thing that I know that a lot of primary schools do really well is that they sing really, really well. Secondary schools perhaps don't necessarily do that quite as well, and we are really guilty as secondary school teachers of saying, well, why didn't they do this in primary school? But then we don't build on what they actually do in primary school. So as Mrs. McCartney said, it's going to be difficult next year in terms of no singing. But do you, as primary music leaders, how confident are you in knowing what the expectations are at the end of Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2, and then when they leave you at Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4? So you might be surprised to know that at the end of Key Stage 4, really the minimum for GCSE is grade 3 on their instrument. So then at the end of Key Stage 2, we're looking perhaps grade 2, grade 1 at the end of Key Stage 2, and then prep test at the end of Key Stage 1. Now these are high expectations. That's not to say that every student must meet these standards. The national curriculum does not put standards on it, but because the national curriculum doesn't put a minimum standard, you have to go to the only thing that does put a standard on, and that is the GCSE course, and then work backwards. So, thing is, as non-specialists, do you actually even know what any of these standards look like anyway, now that we've put a label on them? So, in terms of planning progression and musical performance, it is helpful to break it down like this. And so Key Stage 1, we're looking at pre-grade 1. So we are looking at beginners in Key Stage 1. I would suggest that you start with a music tutor book designed for your chosen instrument. And it really does need to be more or less designed for that specific instrument, with a few caveats. That which is easy on one instrument is not necessarily easy on another. Those of you who have seen clarinet players with folders or bags that say that's one small step for music, one giant leap for clarinet kind. That semitone between B flat and B is horrific to play on the clarinet for beginners. Whereas on other instruments, it's just a semitone. It's not that difficult at all. Don't overload. I'm a big believer in not overloading cognitively our students, but that we do need to build it up little by little. So just introduce the theory work as and when you need it. Either you're listening to or you're performing it at the time. What does it actually require you to do? Because the students aren't going to be using it, they're not going to remember it. At Key Stage 1, listening work doesn't really need to integrate with the performance. Choose the music that will highlight a particular style or musical concept that you want to discuss, that you think will be useful to the students. But I wouldn't stress yourself trying to shoehorn it all together, because at this point you are trying to teach the performance skills and the listening skills. You don't need to try and smush them together at this point. So then those of you who are teaching Key Stage 2, we are looking at grade 1 really by the end of Key Stage 2. So by the end of year 6, we are looking at grade 1 for most students. And that sounds a little bit scary to non-musicians, but really it's not that much further on. It's just an advanced beginner. They should all be capable of it. So I would suggest using a published exam board syllabus to benchmark your resources. Teaching grade 1 pieces will probably not fit in to what you're trying to do because they're a little bit too long perhaps. The students will lose interest, they'll lose focus if you only see them once a week. But using that published exam board to just benchmark the resources, knowing what they need to know if they were going to sit an exam in that subject. So Glockenspiel comes under the tuned percussion requirements. They need to know C, F and G major scales and the relative minors. Think about the melodic range that you can see in the music. So at grade 1 it's about an octave and a third. What sorts of rhythms are required. So just have a little look at the pieces of music and see, well actually, is this piece that I want to use similar to this? Or can I find a piece of music that, I can shorten, I can take out the repeats and actually use that grade 1 piece. At Key Stage 1, try and build in part playing ensemble. So that means rather than all the children playing at the same time, playing the exact same part, let's have a look at, can they play two or three different parts against each other? And at Key Stage 2, I would try to link the performance to the listening work so we get a holistic view of the music history and the styles, so that they understand the tune that they are playing, how it fits historically. Why does that tune sound the way that it does? Why does the accompaniment for that tune sound the way that it does? So, I have a little example for you. This is a really fantastic book, Voggy's Glockenspiel Book. Now, those of you who have seen, I did a piece for Brued the Arts, where I talked about whole class ensemble teaching using the recorder, and it did not age well. It was at the start of lockdown, it did not age well, and so we're going to talk a little bit about the Glockenspiel, and I actually have a Glockenspiel and a copy of the book to show you, which my able assistant's going to grab. It's next to the computer next door. So always have a teaching assistant to save your bacon. Right. So this is a traditional style music tutor book. You basically start at the start and work all the way through. Thank you. Just start at the start, work all the way through. It's a really good little size. It's spiral bound, it lays flat, and it comes with a CD as well for those of you who do not play the piano. So the theory, the note reading is introduced as required. It's got little quizzes as you go through for the children to complete. And really, even if you do not play an instrument, you can't read music, you can still teach with this book, because you just learn as the students learn as well. Now, the thing is, this book uses coloured notes, which may not match up to coloured notes on your Glockenspiel. It is helpful for note reading because it helps the children to see the difference in pitch because of different colours as well, and just helps them differentiate, especially between the lines and the spaces. Now, I actually do have coloured Glockenspiels from my school that I bought this year, but mostly because they were cheap. Because like everyone, budgets are tight. So this one is from Gear for Music. It's one of their own brands, and it has coloured notes on it. But they do not all match up. They are almost the same as the Voggies, but not quite, which is a little bit unfortunate. But certainly at least for your beginners, it'll be quite helpful. Now, it doesn't cover everything that the pre-grade one covers, but it is completely suitable for year one. And I think I'm really looking forward to using it with the students. Glockenspiels post-COVID, you just wipe them down with just get an antibac spray and a cloth, or your antibac cloths, whatever you use to clean with. And same with the sticks. You can wipe the sticks down, or you can get one of those little bags that you get for putting delicate things in for the tumble dryer, or the reusable bags. Sainsbury's do them really cheaply for produce. So they're porous bags. Stick them all in, dunk them in a bucket of hot soapy water, and give them a rub around. Put everything in the bag, zip the bag up, put it in the water, rub it around, leave it to dry. Although if you're doing back-to-back lessons, it's not, you might just have to wipe them down. Great thing about this book, the book's £7 each, but it was published in Germany. So it's covered under your CLA licence for copies and scans, and displaying on the board and putting on your VLE. My school is an independent school. We have our schools printed music licence and our CLA licence provided by the IAPS. The DFE covers state schools and I believe academies as well. But the best thing to do is check with your school business manager or your bursar. They will know exactly what licences you have. It's the same licence. The CLA licence is what covers photocopying, textbooks and whatnot. But schools don't pay for this licence. The DFE covers it for you because it's published in Germany. Although this is the English translation, it is not covered by the music licence. It is covered by the textbook licence. I have the confirmation from the CLA. If you want to contact me about it, I can give you the confirmation that I received. It wasn't originally on their their database until I contacted them about it specifically, and it is in the process of being added so that you can publicly search for it. So the fact that it's coloured, you might want to just photocopy them not coloured if it doesn't match up with your Glockenspiel. Just scan it in black and white or copy it in black and white, put it up on the board, because then you're not sharing books as well, which is obviously going to be a COVID consideration. So the Glockenspiels are approximately £17 each. I wouldn't suggest sharing them because they have to sit too close together then, and also we want to make sure that we are giving proper hand-to-hand Glockenspiel technique. As I said, most schools will have access to Charanga through their music hub. Do check it out. They've got 2 stages. Stage 2 builds on what Vogie has covered. Stage 1 could be used instead of Vogie if you're starting your Glockenspiel a little bit later. So if you're starting with year 2 or year 3 upwards, I would use the Charanga one rather than the Vogie book, because Vogie might be a little bit too easy for them. But you could certainly still use the quizzes from Vogie, no matter what year group you're starting with. And then this is my caveat for make sure what you're using is written for that instrument, because actually with keyboard, you can use the keyboard courses for Glockenspiel. Charanga have a keyboard course, chapters 1 to 3 roughly equivalent to the stage 2 Glockenspiel course, and then chapters 4 to 7 go on even further, and they cover more of the music theory that we need. It doesn't quite cover everything for grade 1, but again, grade 1 is just a benchmark. It's not required for the national curriculum. You don't have to do it. So semiquavers and bass clef are not covered, but the Glockenspiel doesn't play in the bass clef anyway. If you do have keyboards, or again you want to keep going a little bit further, you can use the complete keyboard books, which are really good. Anyone who went to school in the 90s will probably remember this from their music department. They've been republished a couple of times. It is covered by the SPML for photocopying and VLE use, but it is technically an anthology, so choose your pieces widely. And I've given a little bit of information there about what those exceptions are. Anthologies, you may copy up to 10% of the total by number of pieces. So really you're looking at 2 pieces from each book, but they are quite long. So they are £8 each, those books. So, questions and comments. I'm going to flick back through to the chat and see if anyone has got anything to say about practical music making. Now, it is quite a whistle-stop tour, and I am well aware that this is quite jam-packed, so you may need some time to just go away and think how this applies to your setting. And you can always DM me on Twitter, or you can email me if you've got any questions. I'm more than happy to chat, but if anyone's got any questions just now, then do speak now. I'll have a little drink while we wait. So as Mrs. McCartney said, was I adapting my plans in terms of no singing? Yes, I am. I've swapped recorders for Glockenspiels. I've invested in 20 Glockenspiels, and we're split over 3 buildings, and I may well invest in 60 Glockenspiels. So I've got 20 in each building, because they're quite heavy, and I don't really want to carry them about. My biggest challenge is EYFS, because Jolly Music is, it's all built round this idea of singing before playing, and so EYFS is still my tricky point at the moment, but I'm trying to get my class numbers down to make it a little bit easier. So I don't think we've got any questions just now about that, so I will barrel on through into the next section. So vocabulary and theory, or listening and appraising, the sort of thing that, if you are a non-specialist, may strike fear in your heart. Performing's easier than this is the real sort of background knowledge, deeper knowledge that we need. So as I was saying, my advice would be to introduce the theory as required by the performance. Don't overload them with things that they're not actually going to use. Be clear about the image, the name, the sound or meaning, and then use it. So Churanga have teacher and student vocab documents available if you've got access to Churanga. I've linked you there to clementstheory.com, and they've got the musical terms split up by grade, associated board grades, which you can use as a bit of a musical dictionary for yourself. So, for instance, I quite like this image for using for displays as well, or when you are teaching it. Just zoom in on it, really focus on the thing that you are trying to explain to the student. So even if you are using like the book up on the board or under the your visualizer, maybe to put it to one side and have maybe even a whiteboard version of this if you're using it under a visualizer, a laminated version where you can just draw it as and when you need, but really focus the students in on what is this image that you are talking about. Because if you're just sort of gesticulating to it on the board, treble clef tends to be next to something else, like the stave, for instance. And so you want to make sure that they are very clear on what it is that you are pointing at. So this is what it looks like. This is what it is called, treble clef. This is what it means, or this is what it sounds like, if it's something that you can demonstrate orally. So a treble clef sets the range for the stave. You might then actually have to say, this is the stave. And it shows medium to high pitched sounds, and then you show it being used. So in this case, because it's a visual thing, it's a symbol, we can show it being used on the stave. If it was perhaps something that it was something audible, then you can demonstrate that on the Glockenspiel, on the piano, with your voice. So the vocabulary in theory, I am more than happy to do small group or one-to-one sessions with anyone who wants to do basic music theory, that wants to build their skills on that via Zoom or something that's a little bit more interactive than this, if that is something that you think that you need in order to provide that high quality teaching that you want to give for every subject. So Key Stage 1, Pre-Grade 1, we're looking at note values, time signatures, bar lines, treble clef stave and bass clef stave. And then Key Stage 2, again, it's just a little bit more detail. So tied notes, different pitches, so sharps, well, let's just say not floats, flats, sharps, flats, natural signs, major scale, key signatures, degrees of the scale, tempo markings, dynamic markings, and articulation. All of these are things that the students need to know in order to access the sheet music. And I personally feel that this is really where, why actually a lot of schools do singing more than instrumental music making, because this can be a little bit of a barrier to teaching it effectively. So listening and appraising. Listening and appraising at Key Stage 1, it doesn't need to be complicated, it's just encouraging the students to listen closely to what they hear. So Churanga has published some really good schemes of work. I personally, as a music specialist, wouldn't pick them up and use them without modification, but that is true for every scheme of work. And that's the same for companies that provide English, maths, science, etc. I don't feel that anyone should ever pick up a scheme of work and recreate it. It has to suit your setting. You know your students. The listening and praising pieces at Churanga are well chosen. I think they are very, very well chosen, but the features tend to need pre-teaching. It doesn't actually teach what it is that the questions ask. So you need to go through the listening pieces and the appraising questions, and you need to pick out the things that you're expecting the students to pick out, and then you actually have to teach them. There are 6 steps in each Churanga. scheme of work. And so I would maybe use step 1 resource as an example, ask them to identify and directly specifically teach those features that you want them to listen out for in the subsequent steps. Please do not fall into the trap of discovery learning, because you open the door to children voicing misconceptions. So it may only be that one child has a misconception, but the minute they voice that, you now have 30 children that have that same misconception, which you then have to unteach. So, discovery learning and music do not go together in any way. It's very specific. Tell the students what they are hearing, teach them what they are hearing, and then allow them to recall that information in future. In terms of we come back to the practical music making a little bit here, I mix and match charanga with the instrument tutor books. I don't think charanga takes 6 weeks to cover, and I like to have a little bit of mixture of singing and instrumental skills when we are allowed to sing. So you can either start your whole year with the tutor books and then come back to some of the charanga things, or if you are using all the charanga units, maybe use the charanga listening the first time for the first couple of units alongside your tutor book, and then for maybe units 4, 5 and 6 use charanga practical units as well. It has standalone listening banks. If you're quite confident with what you want to pick out and what you want to teach them, you can just dip into the standalone listening banks. I must say, I don't. I tend to use their integrated performing and listening units. I also make the performance units a little bit harder, but then again, a lot of our boys start private music lessons at year 3. And so a lot of our boys have gone past grade 1, grade 2 by the end of Key Stage 2 anyway. And so I do have to supplement them a little bit. But the great thing about that is that for those boys who don't have that individual lessons, they still have accessible resources. So you've got some really great differentiation built in there. Or if you really don't like the practical music making, invest in some classroom jam books. And it's such a shame I don't have them here to show you. They are quarantined in my classroom. But they are 4-part arrangements for use in the classroom. There are 4 books. Each book has 10 arrangements, so there's loads to choose from it. And you can print as many copies of the parts as you need. So you buy the books, they're about £20 each, maybe £15 each for the books. But and it comes with a score in the book. And then you go online and you put the code in from your book, and you can print off as many copies of the parts as you need. So again, it's a buy once, use forever sort of resource. See if you can bid for some money if you need, and then just keep a listening list. This is something that I only started doing last year after 10 years. Only started doing it last year, and it's just a spreadsheet, but it's literally every piece of music that the students listen to, the unit that they listen to it in, and then just hyperlink in the MP3s or Spotify links, the YouTube links for them, and then you can add more information to your spreadsheet as you go. So you can say what the time signature is, or the melody is played by the trumpet, or whatever. And then if you're looking for a good example later, you can always come back and say, well, we listened to something back in Unit 2 that had a trumpet as the main instrument, or we listened to something that was in 5/4 back in Unit 5 of last year. And so mine has 142 tracks on it, but I'm sure if I really thought about it, it would double at least. So that's how many different bits of music my boys listen to between nursery and year 6 is what I've gone up to so far. 142 tracks that are explicitly taught. So there's lots and lots and lots to think about there. So that, as I said, is a massive whistle-stop tour. I wanted to leave enough time for questions and comments, so I'm just going to go over to the chat bit just now, and we'll see if anybody's got anything that they want to discuss just now. So Carrie has asked, how do we go about arranging online training regarding teaching music listening and appraising? any sort of online training that you want for teaching anything to do with music really, or any joint planning, or just a case of here are my plans, would you cast your eye over them and give me any feedback on it, you can do it through the Teach Music website, which is teachmusiclondon.blogspot.com, and there's a form on the website. But you'll also get an email as well after this has gone out. You'll get an email with all the links as well, and you can get in touch that way and say if there's anything in particular that you want some help with. So I'm going to give you some time because I said there's a bit of a lag, so you probably haven't even heard me yet asking you if anyone has any questions. So we'll just give it a little minute and see what pops up. At what year group would I start to teach ocarinas? I don't teach ocarinas, but I know that one of the girls' school down the road teaches ocarinas. Year 2, if I was doing it sort of equivalent to how I would do recorders, we start to teach that about February of year 2. And that is so that the students have a chance to really get to grips with things like pulse and basic rhythm and the differences in pitch before we get to the instrument stage. So we would spend EYFS and the start of year 2 as a bit of a transition stage as well, looking at pulse games, rhythm games, perhaps passing the pulse around the room, feeling the heartbeat, being able to sing at a variety of pitches at that point, so that we're really training their ear. Because one of the things that we've noticed for anyone who teaches recorder is that sometimes the students don't even realise that they're playing, that they're not covering the holes properly on the recorder, or not producing the correct pitch. So it's quite good if you've built up those listening skills already. Yeah, I mean, I've never used ocarinas. When I came to my current school, I inherited recorders, and I really wasn't sold on them at first, I must say. But now I love them, and I do actually think from primary music perspective they're fantastic. But I've heard some wonderful things about ocarinas, as Mrs. McCartney is saying, great for SEN pupils. But certainly it's not something that I've ever experienced myself. I suppose the sort of similar idea is ukuleles. I always use guitars at secondary school. I didn't like the idea of ukuleles at secondary school because you get up to year 11 and you have these big hulking great boys playing a tiny ukulele, and I always just think it's a bit ridiculous. But at the same time, working in the primary school, you're working with little people with little hands, and the ukulele really does suit a lot of those students better. But I wouldn't introduce ukulele until, I don't know, maybe year 4. I start guitar in year 5, but I start guitar with half size guitars, and even some of my year 5s struggle with a half. You do get small boys sometimes. Hi Amy. by all means, please do email me. You are more than welcome to. It's teachmusicldnblog@gmail.com, and we can have a chat. And I'm more than happy to reach out and to help. I have been a one-man department in secondary schools, and I really do feel that being able to do this and being able to talk to other subject specialists or other teachers of music, and in this case people who are primary teachers, because I've come from the secondary sector, you know, I think we've all got a lot to learn from each other, and so, you know, I'm just delighted to have this opportunity to speak to you all today. So if we don't, I'll just put a sort of last call out for any more questions or comments just now, because there is a little bit of a lag on this chat. So I'll put a little call out just now for any more questions. I've just realised actually that I've given all my answers verbally, and so if anyone's just trying to watch it looks like I haven't answered anything in the comments. So my able assistant will tell me when any more questions pops up. Oh, the lag's not too bad then. Well, if there's no more questions, then all that really remains for me to say is thank you so much for being here. You will get an email about 11:15, I expect. That's got the link to the YouTube channel. There will be a replay of this video on the YouTube channel. There will also be a link to the PDF version of this presentation, where you will have the space on the page to make some notes. It's got the links to the rubrics blog post, which then again has the podcast embedded in it, so you can have a little listen to that. But by all means, go away and think about how any of this is relevant or not relevant to what you are doing. And it really is, I mean, I could spend an hour talking about each of these things, but I think it's more about making it useful to you. So have a think about it, and do get in touch if you would either like some bespoke help with anything in particular, any joint planning. Happy to have a conversation over email, or we can do we can arrange like a Zoom session or something. Or if you just, you know, want me to go in more detail about something, do another web one like this in more detail, get in touch. All the links are in the email. If I was any good at this, I'd be able to point at something and say click here to subscribe, but I don't know where the button is. But there's a button somewhere that you can click to subscribe. Do follow me on Twitter. It's mostly teaching related, with the odd cat thrown in. So go and enjoy. I hope the weather is nice where you are. It's 32 degrees here, so hopefully you've got some lovely weather as well where you are. Please go and enjoy it, and enjoy the rest of your holidays. And I'm going to work out how to press stop on this. Thank you ever so much.